More reaction on the release of that report. We're joined tonight by DA leader John Steenhuisen. John, a very good evening to you. Welcome to the program. You're among the people who had, for the better part of the duration of the inquiry, really been calling for it to conclude so we could get an idea of the actual findings and action that can be taken against the implicated people. Now that you've been able to read it, has it lived up to your expectations?
Yes, certainly. I think that the report, the parts that I've read through so far, appear to be on point. It's not new information. It's information that we were all aware of during the course of the testimony. The fact that it's now been set down in writing by Judge Zondo and others obviously now gives it a great deal more gravitas and impetus. But this report is only going to be worth the action that is taken upon it. This is not the first time we've had an inquiry. We've had the Seriti Commission inquiry, with the Farlam Commission of Inquiry. We've had many others. And in all of those, including the Waterkloof landings and the Nkandla report, the main protagonists get away scot-free, with generally one or two of the smaller individuals implicated being taking the fall. And I think what we need to see now, going forward, is a very, very rigorous and determined prosecution. I agree with Mr. Maharaj. There's no need for the NPA or any of the prosecuting authorities or the Hawks to wait for the president to make his comments on the report. They should be acting on that now. And this is important because if one looks back at the Seriti Commission of Inquiry into the arms deal, by the time it came around to laying charges or getting action taken, some of the protagonists were dead, some of them had left the country, and others had left their positions in the public service and were ordinary private citizens. And so the faster we act now, I think the more likelihood we're going to have of bringing those implicated in the report to justice.
So is the solution then at this point, we know the problems with the NPA, it doesn't have enough high profile, or shall we say strong prosecutors, investigators, there are issues with funding. Is this the time then to urgently make sure more money is directed to that office?
Yes, and also to have a very, very close look at our crime detection and corruption combating bodies. I think if you read the report by Judge Zondo, he himself expresses concern about whether there is capacity. If one looks back at the Scorpions, for instance, that were disbanded and replaced by the Hawks, they were a multidisciplinary organization that had police officers working with lawyers, working with prosecutors, working with forensic accountants, who were able to put together solid cases that resulted in convictions. I think the Scorpions had an over 90% conviction rate, which is phenomenal, and one of the reasons why they disbanded, because they were so effective. The Hawks have had a less than stellar record, and I think the time has come to not only look at making sure we're funding the National Prosecuting Authority properly, but also that we have a unit in South Africa that is able, in a multidisciplinary way, to be able to get to the bottom of corruption and maladministration and to prosecute it effectively. It's no use having a docket prepared, it gets to court, and because of sloppy police work or a lack of experience, that docket ends up being useless in bringing and effecting a conviction. So I think there's two key angles. There's a prosecuting angle, but there's also the policing angle, the police work angle, that's going to have to be massively beefed up if we're to ensure that going forward we will no longer have this type of state capture and corruption taking place on the scale that it has over the course of the last decade and a half.
And it's one thing, isn't it, to say that South Africa cannot afford to wait until all three parts of this report are in. President Ramaphosa said at its release, the handover, that he expects that he should be able to brief Parliament on a way forward by no later than the deadline, or even earlier, in fact, the deadline of the end of June. But the other obvious hurdle at this point is that many of the implicated people are themselves likely to take this report and challenge it legally, which may lead to further delays as far as an immediate process of justice and accountability legally.
Yes, but look, I mean, I think there's two key important aspects to what you've just said. The first is that Parliament can continue to process the report, but also the National Prosecuting Authority and the Hawks and the SIU are not bound by having to wait for the legality of that report. They could take much of the information in there and use that for the basis of their own investigations and prosecutions. So what we don't need now is dilly-dallying around with the dance around whether this report is true or whether this is accurate. Those enforcement agencies, and in fact, any prosecuting agency or investigation agency worth its salt would have been camped out at the Zondo Commission during the course of the testimonies, writing out dockets. They are not bound by law to wait for the conclusion of an inquiry into state capture to prosecute acts of omission and commission that were illegal in terms of the Prevention of Organized Crime and Combating Corrupt Activities Act, violations of the Public Finance Management Act, the Municipal Finance Management Act, or the Public Audit Act. Those dockets should already have been written up. I think that we can't sit back and expect Judge Zondo to do the work of the NPA, the Hawks, Parliament, and the Executive. Each of those branches is going to have to take responsibility for its own aspects of that report. Parliament, too, is in the dock somewhat because a lot of those findings should have been made by Parliament. And if Parliament had been operating effectively and presiding officers were allowing MPs to robustly perform their functions, perhaps we could have avoided a lot of those things happening. So Parliament itself is going to have to do some introspection over how it exercises oversight over state-owned entities and the executive going forward. It needs to be far more robust, far more probing, and far more effective than it has been.
Let me get your thoughts on the two main events of the last 4 days. Sunday, we wake up to news that part of Parliament is on fire. So far, one person arrested. We're told he was seen on CCTV footage and found in the building itself as it burned. Today, we got news that someone had attacked the Constitutional Court and police had to fire a warning shot to sort of get him under control. We don't know who the person is yet. Are you linking these two events?
Well, I think you are able to link a number of events, and if things start to fall into place, it starts to develop a pattern. And I think that pattern goes back even further to the July unrest and riots that we saw in parts of KZN and Gauteng. I think that there definitely is a fight back by elements within the RET faction and the state capture faction, who are obviously now starting to get incredibly nervous about what the future holds for them now, given the fact that the report has been finalized and given the fact that now it looks likely that prosecutions are set to begin. And I find it odd that within the same week you have an attack on the legislative arm as well as the judiciary, virtually within days of each other. And I think this is a sign that we need to be on alert. But the best antidote to this type of behavior is by ensuring that our organizations and the arms of state, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary continue to act seamlessly, continue to do the work that's prescribed by the Constitution for us to do, and to do it effectively and to the best of our ability. That is the best antidote to this anti-democratic type of behavior that we're seeing. Obviously, the arrest is very curious, and I'm waiting to see the evidence of that. I think that if one goes back to the break-in, for instance, at the state, at the Chief Justice's office, there were very quick arrests after that. They disappeared like the morning mist once the pressure was off, and no one's ever heard of those individuals again. What we don't need is scapegoating. We need to make sure we really get to the bottom of where this fire started, how it was able to spread around the building. So, and we must be careful not to scapegoat.
We are running out of time, but what I want to ask you is this. Do you, from where you are sitting, and of course you've got members of Parliament who sit on various portfolio committees, some of them deal with issues around the security cluster. There was a lot of focus on that post the July unrest. Do you get a sense now that the necessary alertness exists to respond in the event that what we're dealing with here is bigger than just two lone individuals who A, set fire to the buildings of Parliament and B, attacked the Constitutional Court, if it is indeed bigger than that, because we don't know that it is at this stage?
Well, I think you make an excellent point, and the big question that follows from that is, where is our state security apparatus? It is the job of state security to be detecting these types of things and conspiracies if they exist, and to be able to get to the bottom of them. Why is it that the state security agency in South Africa is always playing catch-up? Schools burn, businesses burn, public infrastructure gets burnt and damaged. We have xenophobic riots, and the state security agencies always seems to be the last person to know about what's going on. So I do think that we've got to do something to improve our domestic intelligence capability so that we can predict and prevent these types of things happening. That's how it works around the rest of the world. There's a very strong move to make sure that you preempt any type of this behavior taking place. Why are we always playing catch up, trying to fix things up after the fact? We should be preventing them in the first place, and that requires a solid state security apparatus, which I'm afraid to say I don't believe exists in South Africa at this stage.
John Steenhuisen, leader of the Democratic Alliance, good to speak to you tonight, sir. Thank you for your time.